Welcome to Views from the World Tree. On today's episode, we talk about the September 11th attacks, the ensuing conflict as a result of these attacks, and how both these events help shape the video games that we play today. And now, on with the episode.
For personal news this week, not a lot exciting happened in my life. It was a pretty relaxing week. I did start a new book that I heard about on the Art of Manliness podcast. It is by a gentleman named Micah Mortali, and it is called Rewilding: Meditations, Practices, and Skills for Awakening in Nature. It's all about the theory that we as humans have become domesticated versions of our former wild ancestors, and that some of that may not be a good thing. And it talks about how to get out and reconnect with the energy that is in nature. How about you, Steve? Any personal news this week?
Yeah, I'm excited to share some of them, but this book sounds really fascinating. Before work today, I was reading an Outside magazine about how doctors are actually prescribing kind of wilderness therapy for people who are suffering from depression or other medical diseases. And it just sounds interesting, this idea that we've become domesticated versions of ourselves and need to kind of reconnect with the wild. That you'll have to let us know how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I just, like I said, I just started it, and well, I guess what I really mean is I literally just started it. Like I just picked it up and it's on my Kindle. I'm about a paragraph into it, but um, on like I said, on the Art of Manliness, he had the author on, and they talked quite a bit about it, and it did sound like one that I'm going to enjoy. So I'll definitely bring a full review after I've read it.
That sounds fun. I was about to bring up your wife's comment last week about how you need to leave the house so you can actually have something to share this week. So,
Oh, don't bring that up. You'll letting her think that she's right will set a dangerous precedent. No, I'm just kidding. Honey, if you're listening, you're always right.
true words never spoken. As far as my news, I did not have much going on. I did go up to Estes Park to the Scott Fest up there and competed in the Highland Games. I was able to get 3 personal records, including my first ever perfect caber toss. And if you're not familiar with how the caber's scored, it's a accuracy event where you throw the log and you want to get as close to directly in front of you as you can. And so I got my first perfect 12 o'clock for maximum points, and that was exciting for me. Other than
Nice.
that,
I'm glad you brought that up. I was just about to interject and say, for those of our listeners that don't share our heritage and interests, they probably would have no idea what constitutes a perfect caber.
fair. Um, Most of the people, when I'm like, oh, I'm going to go compete in the Highland Games, they said, oh, you're going to go throw telephone poles. That would be really hard, but yes, that is the most famous um, event of the games. So that's what I did this weekend. Finished 4th overall. So
Good. Congratulations. Yeah, telephone poles, man. Those are big and heavy. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's what Halfthor Bjornsson throws. But
maybe he actually does have the world record for one of the events in the Highland Games. He's got the record for weight over the bar.
this
So
is my surprised face. And since this is a podcast, I guess I should, tell everybody my surprised face is not surprised.
Yes, I see. Good news, everyone!
So for current affairs, again, not a whole lot going on this week. by now, our listeners may have figured out that I lean pretty heavily libertarian. As much as libertarians can lean, we kind of try and stay in the middle. The side effect of that is 90% of people hate our political views. So I try and stay away from any news that's too political. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of it is right now. But I did want to mention, in case anybody was unaware, the trailer for the new Matrix sequel, The Matrix Resurrections, came out recently. I think it might actually have been last week. I don't remember, but we didn't talk about it last week. So that's my current event for this week. It was a great trailer. Um, those movies are very nostalgic for me. Some of my favorite movies, and it was great to see some of the actors come back and see where they're taking the movie. Looking forward to it.
I haven't had the chance to watch it yet. Does it give any indication of what this movie might be about, or is it just as cryptic as the original trilogy trailers?
It's pretty open ended, which is something I enjoyed about it. Actually, I you know I'm a bit of a movie buff, and so for me, a movie that I'm not able to guess the plot to, or that doesn't give away the plot in the trailer, is something that I enjoy. But it did. I mean, there's a lot of the cast coming back. You've got Keanu Reeves coming back as Neo, Carrie Ann Moss as Trinity, and they're also recasting some people. There's a new actor playing Morpheus. I don't recall his name, and Jada Pinkett Smith is playing Niobe. And a surprise appearance by Neil Patrick Harris as Neo's therapist. Although it seemed they were trying to suggest that maybe he has a little bit more sinister role than just his therapist. So, looking forward to that.
Please tell me he sings.
I hope so.
I mean, it'd be such a shame for a Broadway actor and Dr. Horrible himself not to sing in it. Sorry, if you didn't get that last comment, he started an internet serial, one of the first ever, and it was called Dr. Horrible's Sing Along Blog. And probably one of my favorite things that I've ever seen, Neil Patrick Harris in.
Yeah, along with Nathan Fillion and a bunch of other, big time nerd household names. So,
yeah. Did Nathan Fillion, was he in Firefly at the time that came out, or was that dang, I can't remember the other show that he was in.
Castle.
That's the one.
Yeah, I don't recall the timeline on that. I guess that's one of the signs that we're getting older.
That and the gray that's starting to get into my beard. But I'll digress. I'll share my current event. I was looking at a bunch of different things today, and I came across an article in the Wall Street Journal about how people are getting upset easier. They basically talked about how there's shorter fuses and more explosive behaviors. They shared one stat of in 2019, there was something around 190 people that had been thrown off of airplanes in the year 2019. So pre-pandemic numbers. And this year they're already at 750. And that just seems crazy to me.
That is, yeah, wow. Especially when you consider, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there are fewer airline passengers in general these days because of the pandemic, like you alluded to.
Yeah, I've flown a couple times since this COVID thing started, and maybe there's fewer flights, but the two times that I've flown, the flights have been even more full than pre-pandemic. So
Maybe that's a contributing factor then.
Yeah. They already throw you into those little tin cans like sardines, and they expect you to wear a mask on top of it. I can see. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but I can see where people might lose their patience a little bit easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to warn you before we jump into the main topic, that we're covering an event that may be triggering for some. We're going to talk about the attacks of September 11th, what led up to the attacks, some of the aftermath, and kind of our own recollections of that day. We know that this event has impacted many around the world in a potentially negative way, and we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of what the topic of the day was going to be.
As I'm sure almost everybody knows, on September 11th, 2001, there were 4 flights that morning that were hijacked from various locations on the East Coast. And they were Flight 11, Flight 175, Flight 93, and Flight 77. The first hijacking took place, they don't know exactly when, sometime after 8 a.m., and these times are all in Eastern time. They do know that the flight took off at 7:59, and then by 8:46, the first flight had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Um, it was actually believed to be an accident at first because this was unprecedented. Nothing like this had ever happened. And then over the next couple of hours, another flight crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. A plane crashed into the Pentagon. And the fourth flight, Flight 93, was en route. It's believed to be to the Capitol, I believe, before passengers and the flight crew were able to wrest control from the hijackers and force the plane down in a field in Pennsylvania. Like I said, it was a pretty jarring event for those of us that were around at the time, for a terrorist attack like that to take place. Steve, what do you remember of that day?
This day was weird for me. So one of the things I'm going to set up my memory about it with a little bit of a backstory. I am unable to fall asleep unless I have some sort of background sound. So I sleep, even today, I sleep with a fan on. Sometimes I'll fall asleep with my headphones in, listening to music or whatnot. But September 11th was towards the beginning of my senior year of high school. And I remember the night before, I had found an AM radio station that was playing the old 1930s, 1940s radio dramas, right? So fully voice acted radio dramas. And so I fell asleep to that, and then my alarm went off to go to school the next day. And I remember I woke up, and there was an excited announcer just kind of talking about a plane hitting the Tower 1 and just kind of excited. And all of a sudden he's screaming because the plane hit the second tower. And I just assumed that it was the radio drama, right? So I found that same AM station in my car on my way to school, and I was listening because I wanted to see how the radio drama would play out. I had no idea it was real. And it was one of the most real things when I realized, no, this is not a radio drama. This is real life. This is actually happening. So, um, that was also the first day that I ever ditched a class. The woman that helped in our copy room at the school, her son was stationed at the Pentagon that day, and she had not heard from him. So I remember ditching a couple classes and spending spending some time with her just to make sure she was okay. And so it was a very, like I said, it was very surreal to me. But those are my two strongest memories of that day. What about you?
Um, well, I mean, this was 20 years ago, um, so I won't pretend to remember everything, uh, perfectly. And I I live now and lived then in the Mountain Time Zone, so this was all pretty early. So it would have been, oh, what, just before 7 a.m.
I want to say the
when the
second plane
first.
hit 6:40ish, 6:50ish.
Yeah, it was early. Um, I know, and I didn't listen to the radio much, and definitely not when I was driving to school, because I lived in a small town and the radio station was terrible. But I digress. I I remember you. So we went to school, and you're hanging out in the hallways and stuff with your friends, and you overhear conversations about, oh, there's an accident, a plane crashed in New York, and I'm sitting here in you know podunk little town in Utah. Our entire high school had like 400 people. My graduating class was less than 100 anyway. So we didn't really know that much about what was going on. But then later that morning, I was over at the college, because when I was in high school, I the college and the high school were close enough that I was able to work on an associate's degree and a high school diploma at the same time through some concurrent enrollment programs. And I was in a law enforcement class over at the college, and so there was some students there that were a few years older than me, and more they were more tuned in to the world and into the news than I was at 17, something like that. And they were all pretty fired up about it. And when I got into the class, the news was on, and I remember, since this was a law enforcement class, there was a lot of guys that had been considering that as a career. And I want to say the next day, a couple of them were 18 and they went down and enlisted in the military that next day. Um, but for me, the part that's seared into my brain is um, the North Tower collapsing just before 8:30, and because I remember we were watching it live at that point and seeing that fall, and just the gravity hitting me of like hundreds of people just died, and I watched it happen on TV. That was It was very impactful for a teenager, just sitting there in class.
Yeah, that's always hard to kind of remember. Just I do feel like this is one of those events where, like the moon landing, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, like all that stuff, the assassination of JFK. This is kind of our watershed moment, right?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it was for a very negative event, not something as uplifting and positive as the moon landing. But I mean, it definitely felt like the whole world just was holding their breath for that morning.
Yeah. Um, the aftermath of that. Um, so, for those of you that are not aware, we grew up in the LDS church, and I just remember the conference when the president of the church came in and said, "We are at war," that was weird to me. That was surreal too, to get that announcement while sitting there watching this televised conference. That was weird looking back
Yeah,
too.
different worlds colliding. The other thing that I just thought of that I distinctly remember from those events was that evening after everything had happened, and the official. And this is the other thing. This was before like a lot of Twitter and stuff like that, and so the news media, because they were there with cameras, was reporting a lot of stuff that the government officials didn't know had happened. Um, but anyway, long story short, we didn't get like an official, you know, speech from the Oval Office until that evening. And I remember watching that live that evening, and there was one line in the president's speech that was, seared onto my brain, and I'm going to read it so I don't misquote it. He said, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." And I was like, whoa. Like, that is, I mean, you learn about warfare and stuff in history, but to have it happen in your own country, and for your own country to be at war with organization that potentially is, in your country, and potentially some are citizens, that it just seemed kind of scary to me, just the potential for divisiveness that statement um, you know opened the door for.
Totally. I I don't know that I watched that press conference. I definitely remember that statement, and I don't know if it's like one of those imprinted memories or whether I actually did witness it. But that's heavy. Just yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that what he said was right. I'm not saying that it was wrong. I'm just, you know my memory of it was just the weight of it when he made that statement. And then my underdeveloped teenage frontal lobe, taking the extra time to process it and being like, wow, did he really just say that?
Yeah. Um, One of my classmates happened to come from a family of refugees from the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and I just remember the fear on their faces when they realized that the no distinction
Mm-hmm.
type of thing, and it really did open up a lot of misplaced hatred. I feel like towards the non prominent races and classes here in the States.
Yeah, I remember that too, unfortunately. Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I grew up in a really small town, and I'll just come out and say it, a very white town. Like, there was, you know, it was in Utah, so it's not super far from the border with Mexico. And so we did have some Hispanic members of the community, and some friends in school. But other than that, I mean, there was really no African Americans. There was no um, people from the Middle East in my town, at least that I can remember. Um, and it was very much, like you said, just the blanket assumption that anybody who looked like the pictures that the news media was circulating was potentially the enemy, unfortunately.
I guess that kind of brings us into the next part of this. We were going to kind of discuss the coping mechanisms, especially with the genre of first-person shooters in video games, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Rainbow Six, and I kind of wanted, when we were discussing this topic, I thought it would be interesting to look at those as whether they helped or actually hurt the relations that we had with people that were different from us. I don't want to get too deep into race theory or anything, but I noticed in Counter-Strike, the good guys are the US soldiers and the bad guys are the Middle Easterners. And the whole point of that game is for the bad guys to put a bomb into a town square, for the good guys to defuse the bomb. And looking at it, when it first came out, I just thought it was a fun game. And now the older I am looking back at it, I'm realizing, man, this does not help build bridges at all. This is actually opposite of bridge building.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, and I don't know if we need to preface this by saying that we're two white guys that at least myself, with my background, I'm still in the process of relearning some of the things that I grew up with. And I think your statement about, as you've gotten older, looking back and realizing, sort of the message behind that, whether it was intentional or not by the developers, I think that shows personal growth. And I think that that's a good thing, to go through. And I wish that more people would have kind of the same sense of enlightenment and about other topics. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to deny and it's entirely possible that it wasn't just 9/11, right? There's been conflict in the Middle East, or between the Middle East and the West, specifically the U.S., for a long time. But it's hard to deny the undertones there. Like you said, the good guys are defusing the bomb. The bad guys are, trying to set the bomb, and if the bomb goes off, they win. Whether it doesn't matter, because you're fighting during the whole match as well, and so you can kill some of the other team, they can kill some of you, but if the bomb goes off, the bad guys win. And if the bomb gets defused, the good guys win. It's I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to guess what the developers were thinking, but at the same time, hard to deny the possibility that it had an influence.
I just wonder. There's certain places in the internet, right, where these diehard players have kind of gone to these anonymous forums and have almost become radicalized, and unintentional consequence. You kind of wonder if the imagery that we're feeding, that we're fed when we're playing these games, we see the bad guys wearing khaki pants and long flowing gowns and turbans. And I mean, a match lasted what, 5-10 minutes, so
Yeah, at the most.
You can play 20-30 matches and you're being fed these images of what the bad guy looks like, what the bad team looks like. And I just wonder if really it was the right thing to do for the devs. I I appreciate what Blizzard did with their um, kind of first person shooter idea on that and making it not racial along their good bad side. But
Yeah, and as we're sitting here talking about it, I I'm wondering, because I don't know what the exact timeline was on when those games came out versus when 9/11 happened versus what games came out before that. It's almost like a chicken and egg question in a way. Did the events of 9/11 influence the developers to paint their game like that, or did, you know, games throughout history, have they kind of fostered those feelings of animosity which were then compounded by the events of 9/11? I don't know. I don't have that answer. It's just, it's an interesting thing to think about.
that is interesting. I know this series Rainbow Six came out with the Tom Clancy book of the same title. Um, and I think I remember playing the first rendition of that game when I was in middle school, maybe high school. I can't remember if it was N64 or PlayStation 2 era.
Yeah, I don't recall the. I've never been a huge first person shooter guy, but the ones that I played, I mean, you had GoldenEye on the N64, and then I kind of had like one or two other games, RPG RTSs, and those were kind of my thing until Halo. And I remember playing. I think the first Counter Strike game I played was. Um, I know it wasn't the first one because the first one was like a mod on Half Life. It might have been Counter Strike Source. I know it was two or three um, games after the first Counter Strike that I got into it. Um, and I did never play Rainbow Six, but I've played some of the others. Right, I've played Ghost Recon and Battlefield and Call of Duty. Just for whatever reason, never got into Rainbow Six.
I always enjoyed Ghost Recon. That one was a fun one. The original game, I think you were in South America, like attacking or trying to hunt drug cartels or something like that.
Yeah, I remember palm trees.
Yeah.
So, but and the other thing is all those games kind of run together in my mind. So I'm probably misremembering or misspeaking. And I apologize for that, but it's not intentional. It's been a long time and they're all very similar.
No worries. I as I was as I was talking and you making that mention, I'm reminded on why we are a hobby podcast and not a video game podcast, because we're both. I'll speak for myself. I'll let Adam speak for him. I mean, I'm a gamer at heart, but I no longer have time to play as much as I would really enjoy.
Yeah, same. Yeah, work and real life, and that takes precedence, unfortunately. If you want to talk about, there's one or two games that, while maybe I'm not the world's foremost expert, like if you wanted to talk World of Warcraft, raid strategies, probably not from the last like 3 years, but anytime before that, yeah, you want to talk about all that stuff, sure. We can talk strategies and um, spell rotations and all that stuff. But other than the one or two games that I've put a lot of time into, I don't know, feel like an old man sometimes, which I guess is why I don't play a lot of the first person shooters, because these kids, man, they are on the ball when it comes to some of these games. I just don't have the reflexes anymore.
Yeah, I I look at these kids and I don't think I ever had the reflexes to keep up with them. But to kind of go back to the subject at hand, though, this imagery, that did it help as a coping mechanism? Did us as Americans and the American youth, did we need games like this to take out our frustrations, or did it do more harm? Was it Did it create more of a division? Um, Growing up, I would have said it helped. It let me take out my frustration. It let me attack an enemy and made me feel better at the time, right? Without actually attacking and killing a living person, which, I mean, I can't even hunt. I hate shooting guns. So um, for me, it was an outlet. And then looking back, I do feel like it did cloud my judgment a lot. And I was very lucky to have friends from the Middle East that, if I didn't know them, I'm sure my hatred would have just spiraled, right? But what about you? Do you think it helped or hurt?
Um, well, like most things, I'm gonna take the middle road a little bit. I think some of both. I think, which I guess is echoing what you said, but I think for some people it helped, like you said. It gives you an outlet that doesn't actually hurt anybody, other than maybe you're spending too much time playing video games, so you're hurting yourself maybe. But um, it and I've seen recent studies actually that um, first person shooters, especially as video games get extremely realistic with their graphics, they can be a very effective means of treating veterans with PTSD, because they're reliving a lot of the same images and a lot of that same environment while they're in a known safe location that's familiar to them. So I think if used correctly, it can absolutely be a valuable coping mechanism. I think the problem comes when, like you alluded to earlier, you get some of these radicalized or extremist groups that use it as a way to foster their hatred, and they intentionally um, play these games over and over again, um, with the intention of living out those fantasies in real life someday.
I think that's fair. I know we kind of concentrated on Counter Strike, but I honestly think that most of these modern um, first person shooters have the same thing. So I think we've covered that as much as a 40-ish minute podcast deserves.
That about wraps it up for the meat and potatoes part of this episode. For this week's spiritual journey, we're pivoting away from Norse mythology and the Havamal to a quote from the Dalai Lama, which reads: "The reality today is that we are all interdependent and have to coexist on this small planet. Therefore, the only sensible and intelligent way of resolving differences and clashes of interests, whether between individuals or nations, is through dialogue." And so my take on this is growing up, talking your differences out was seen as unmanly. And I'm making air quotes for people that are listening to the audio. And we resolve differences with our fists. I personally have broken my nose 4 times in my life, and 3 of them were in fist fights when I was a teenager. And so, from my experience, I can tell you that physical altercations as a means of conflict resolution is less than effective. Um, I think in today's world, everybody can agree that um, conflict resolution through dialogue is the mature, civilized way of conflict resolution. To me, I think the trick is figuring out how to get people with such polarizing viewpoints to actually sit down and um, genuinely engage with each other without just devolving into a shouting match. What's your take on it, Steve?
I think you're absolutely correct. I don't think that dialogue would have prevented the attacks of 9/11, kind of going back to our major thing. But over this last weekend, one of the families that I went up to the festival with and volunteered with, the eldest brother is a priest in the Catholic Church. I remember sitting with him at dinner after the festival was over, and we were kind of discussing how to make peace in the world, and people don't know how to listen without rehearsing what they're saying, um, or what they're going to say in response. They listen long enough to find a talking point to swing the conversation back their way. And to echo what you're saying, I feel like if we were taught how to critically listen to each other rather than how to be offended with each other when we were younger, and how to, like, I know I probably wouldn't have some fractured knuckles and whatnot in my hand if I would have had that ability younger. And so I completely agree. I think the Dalai Lama hit this one on the nail. Hit the nail on the head on this one, that we we can solve so much more through dialogue than through acts of violence or anything like that. So, yeah, long-winded way of me saying yes, I completely agree.
All right, that wraps it up for this week's episode of Views from the World Tree. Join us next Sunday for a little bit more lighthearted episode. We'll be talking about conspiracy theories.
If you hated this episode, that's okay. We promise not to be too upset. But if you enjoyed it, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. It does help a lot with the algorithm. You can follow us on social media. We have bonus content on our TikTok and YouTube channel. All links can be found at linktree/viewsfromtheworldtree. Thanks again.